Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 71 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can. Whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game up to the next level. I am Sarah.
And I am Rob.
How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing all right.
You? I'm doing great, yeah.
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 Yeah, it's been a decent week.
It's been an okay week. Work had me absolutely piled under, and I finally dug to the end of that pile today.
Fair enough.
I think
so you're saying the corporation had you pinned down?
Oh, the corporation, man.
We're going to be talking a lot about corporations.
The man.
The man
had me down.
That's right.
Also, we recently did, so tonight's one of our system spotlights. We're doing that on Shadowrun tonight. But pursuant to our last system spotlight for Adventure, Tales of the Aeon Society, apparently Onyx Path Games saw who's the current holder of the IP.
Yes.
Saw our tweet.
Yeah.
And responded to it and let us know a little bit about the current state of their game. It's called Trinity Continuum now.
Which we are excited to take a look at.
Yeah, we are very excited to take a look at that. And they've got... it looks like they're kind of... it used to be 3 distinct games, and it looks like they're kind of trying to like blur the lines on it a little bit and let you play different types of characters from each of the genres in different timelines.
Ooh.
And then they're adding in a few more of their own. They said they're doing a book on assassins that's going to be like a very John Wick feel sort of thing to it.
All right.
But worth giving them a look. This is Onyx Path Games. The main book is called Trinity Continuum.
Sure.
So if you were enticed by that by the system spotlight and you want to look at it,
keep going.
So Trinity is looks like Trinity's out there. A few other things are out there. Aberrant, I believe, is out, or at least it's coming soon.
Yes.
And Adventure is in the works.
Wow. All right.
Full rewrite of it under the new Story Path system.
Well, I know I look forward to seeing that.
Absolutely. All right. Did you have anything else before we roll right into Shadowrun?
No, I mean, if you, I threw a couple of new tracks in there. I know I was saying I was going to use Arcane Anthems for our intros, but this is Shadowrun. I couldn't find anything techno. His stuff is very classic fantasy. Mm-hmm. So I did a little digging and pulled together some tracks. If you're interested to see what those are, they'll be up on the site with their accreditations there and some links to them if you want to pull them down and use them in your own games.
Yeah, go to storytellerconclave.com.
Yep. But we're talking Shadowrun.
We are talking Shadowrun.
Now, when we started this, and after our discussions between yesterday and today, did you feel like there was some depth you missed?
Well, yeah, I was yesterday years old when I learned that was it Planescape apparently ties into the whole Shadowrun storyline. I had no idea about that. But yeah, no, so my experience of Shadowrun.
Or you're talking Earth Dawn, not Planescape.
Or Earth Dawn, not Planescape. Yeah,
Earth Dawn was the 4th world.
Right.
We're living in the 5th world, and Shadowrun is the 6th
world.
And if you know any of that, then welcome to the show.
Yeah, you're already doing better than
I was
better. 24 hours ago.
So let's take a step back and say FOSSA made Shadowrun.
FOSSA made Shadowrun. Back in the day, I would say my experience with it was the FOSSA version of Shadowrun.
Right. Same here.
Second edition Shadowrun when I played it.
Yep.
FOSSA at the time was also making BattleTech.
Yes.
Around that time, they also came out with Crimson Skies. And a miniatures game called Vor.
Yes, which was kind of a as we found out, it is kind of like a conglomerate use of any minis. It's an excuse to use any of the minis that you have and make yourself a little group.
Right.
And basically play a Warhammer-esque game. And that's neat. I think that's great. I mean, basically you can grab whatever you got to make what you got work. But it allows you to make your own your own army, your own units, everything, which is great. I think that's fantastic.
So FOSSA isn't around anymore, though.
Unfortunately,
FOSSA was what they were incepted in 1989, or was it that they published Shadowrun?
They published Shadowrun in 1989, and it stuck around till 2001, with WizKids kind of falling in line there at the end.
Right, yeah, when FOSSA folded and all their IPs got bought up.
And went in various directions. Some of the digital stuff went over to Microsoft. Some of the Some of the tabletop stuff kind of went to another group, which ended up becoming Tops, along with parts of WizKids. So if you may have come in at a point where you're seeing little minis, and if you guys remember a minis game for Shadowrun, that was Tops that had done that. And then Catalyst Games actually picked it back up. And in 2013 was when we had 5th edition released.
Yep.
And then we had 6th in 2019.
Yeah, very recently. I remember seeing the release for that when I was on vacation last year.
Yep. And they're very gung-ho about it. And the whole time that this has been going on, which is something really, I would say, I'm not going to say really unique, it's something really startling, is that the canon for what is Shadowrun has become unchanged. And that's really hard to understand, that FASA had built this canon so hard and so well that it had to carry on.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that and what it made and what kind of world it made for everything to be. And I think, Overwatch was talking with us last night about it, because if there's any god in our community that knows Shadowrun well, he is a devotee. He bows at the garden of Shadowrun and does it very, very well. So understand that if you've got questions, I would throw them his way before you throw it at one of us, but we're pretty decent. We can answer some of them. But keep in mind that FASA had properties, and one of the things that they did great, which we're probably going to end up breaking down in a full show, is their story.
Oh, yeah.
Their world.
I've said literally since high school that FASA could write an amazing world. Their world building was always so great. The characterizations were great. The flow of their story, like their living worlds, was really great. But boy, those guys could not write a game system to save their lives. And I found that I always had this love-hate relationship. And this is coming from, again, someone who played Palladium, you know? And I really hated some of their game systems.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that I hated the systems. They were complex and they were complicated. They were not to the level of Palladium, because there were some distinct differences there, and we'll get into that a little bit as we go into the mechanics of things. But it made for a very different design in the way that you looked at the mechanics. And I think that's the real key there, is that it was layered mechanics, whereas a lot of games, it's not layered, it's required mechanics. Like if you want to do something, these are the required mechanics that sit behind it.
Yeah.
And whereas with the FASA products, even BattleTech to a degree, you can pull back layers and still have a complete game and enjoy it.
Sure.
Like you don't need to be using the MechWarrior stuff to play BattleTech.
But you could.
But you could.
Yeah.
You know, and even some of the newer stuff that they've released, they remind people that, like, hey, if you're just playing a light game with your friends, play it on an Arctic planet and throw the heat management out.
Right.
And just enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
Don't worry about ammo count. You'll probably be dead before you run out anyways. You know? So there's a certain sense of that. But on the other hand, if you want to track every bullet in every gun and know that the third cartridge in this clip that's on your right hip is 2 tracer rounds, 2 incendiary rounds, and then 3 high-velocity rounds. That's a thing.
Yeah.
You can track that. That to that level of detail, as well as the fact that the pocket that's directly below that carries your Superman First Edition comic that you got to deliver. Like, that kind of crap. And that's all within the game's purview.
Just unbelievable.
Yeah. So let's step into this a little bit without going too far. I'm going to kind of take a step. So beyond just the whole Catalyst Games picking it up, one of the things that they have, which mimics a lot of what D&D did, and I'm not too sure exactly who picked it up first, because my memory's a little light here, but they had Shadowrun Missions, which is a living, breathing continuation of missions that they keep releasing, so that you can basically take your character and go to conventions and go to events and continue playing the same character in different missions.
Oh yeah, okay. So kind of like Adventurers League.
Then. Yeah. And in that it's kept the genre alive. People keep playing Shadowrun. And even the transitions between 5th and 6th edition, they tried to make it as seamless as possible for people so that you could easily shift right into it and keep right on rolling.
Yeah, I remember when 6th edition came out, I was watching some videos online going, well, I wanted to see basically how it had evolved, because I hadn't really played it since 2nd edition, but with the brief game that Overwatch ran for us, and I believe using 4th edition.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to watch a video just to see, like, what had changed, what had updated, and stuff like that. And it was still, still very recognizable as Shadowrun, but it looked like from 5th to 6th, a lot of the changes were quality of life improvements.
Yes.
We found that in gameplay, using this stat for this was very, cumbersome. So we've just streamlined it, so it's not even its own separate stat. Now you just use this stat instead.
Yes.
And use that stat for A, B, and C instead of separate stats for all of them. Little things like that, but it was very still Shadowrun.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think, even as we're talking the mechanics, I'll break down some of that, but effectively, some of the ways that the terminology and the archetypes, some of the things that they did with how the technology works, made it easier for the storyteller.
Yeah.
And it was all just to try and streamline the game and make it a little faster, not unlike what D&D did with their 5th edition.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And that's what got me back into D&D, so maybe it's time to give Shadowrun another look,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, always a second look.
Absolutely. One of the other things that they did too, though, not only with their whole living world and stuff like that, but and FASA was kind of famous for this, especially back in the day, releasing novels of their story. I read a good number of the BattleTech novels, and Shadowrun was no exception. They actually released a good number of Shadowrun novels as well, and so that really helped, for those of you who would go out and read those, to really have a kind of a living example of what Shadowrun should play out like.
Mm-hmm.
So that you had an example of what that game world looked like in a very living, breathing sense. And these weren't like real throwaway novels either.
No.
Like there was some really well written stuff in there from some pretty high profile authors too.
Oh, very much so. Very much. I mean, I was lucky enough to sit across from one and play some BattleTech because he wrote for both worlds. And it was really neat to try and just go back to some of his stuff, which was written in the books, not even the novels. He did, I think, do 2 novels as well, but just the way the writing moves within the books themselves. Like, I want to say FASA was one of the first people to really bring the world into the creation of the book. And if you remember 4th edition D&D and 3.5, the book actually had like art done a little differently, and sometimes the spells were described in a certain way.
Yeah.
And it felt like the book was its own grimoire of D&D. And I think that is kind of an ode back to what they did.
Sure.
In making it feel like that. I mean, there were whole sections of the book that were written in a bulletin board kind of forum.
Yeah, like
text.
a message board sort of thing.
Where you're discovering things about what's happening in the world through this format.
I remember one of them was like a weapons guide.
Yeah.
And there was this like some sort of like an assault rifle or something like that was like a really super high caliber weapon. And there's just this little snippet at the bottom that was like, oh yeah, this thing high caliber doesn't begin to describe it. I use the bullets for this thing was paperweights.
Yeah.
Like and then like the message underneath that was like paperweights, no crap. Like this thing is silent as it is deadly too. Someone was firing this thing in the room next to me, and it sounded like a typewriter.
Yeah, exactly.
And just seeing these quote unquote users.
Yep.
That are just discussing this on a message board format kind of gives you this very living feel of the format of the world. So.
Exactly, and it's I would say that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the world and about what the setting is. Now, cyberpunk is the term that people generally use for it.
Cyberpunk is the quickest word to go to, but it's not the right word.
It is dystopian future, and I think it's said best in the term high-tech, low-life.
What did I say last night? It's not true cyberpunk unless it's from the cyberpunk region of France.
Correct.
Otherwise, it's just sparkling dystopia.
That's correct. That is correct. But cyberpunk itself is a term that's kind of been coined, if you're talking within the genre, about the idea of fighting the totalitarian of it, whatever it may be within that world, from a high tech but low life standing, meaning from the bottom of the barrel. and doing it with a sense of like community as well. That there is a fighting community. There's a resistance level to it.
Yeah.
The difference is with Shadowrun is that literally the game puts you in a position where you know where you sit in the pecking order automatically. You're not fighting or resisting anyone to start with. You are literally at the bottom of the barrel just trying to make ends meet. Regardless of what your class or status is as you step into the game, because you can step into the game with quite a bit of funding and kit it out. But in the end, you need money to survive. And that's pretty much what the game is about, is how do you set that level of survival versus how well do you put yourself against the world. And I say the world in the sense of corporations
the
in general.
corporations, because essentially in this dystopian future, there have been certain governmental rulings and stuff like that that have essentially given de facto nationhood to corporations.
Yeah, and they're
allowing
large
them to
structures.
field their own standing armies to defend themselves versus corporate espionage and
There's
stuff
a
like
lot
that.
of detail to the history, but effectively yes.
But so basically,
and there's dragons and magic.
Yeah, so the corporations are the new state, essentially.
Yeah.
And so you are living in the shadows between these corporations, just fighting to survive.
Yeah.
And there's dragons and stuff.
Yeah, and you might be making a name for yourself, or you may be trying to get out of the game, or maybe you're just trying to get just enough, like, maybe you're that guy trying to get just enough money to get done and retire, and live somewhere light,
Maybe
in
it's a revenge
Tirnanog,
story,
Exactly.
Maybe somebody burned you, and you dipped into the shadows to try to find the right way to seek justice on your own.
Yeah, but the one thing that it did really well is that it gave you a position that you are a Shadowrunner. It's the name of the game. It puts you right into position. Like, and I loved this writing. I'm going to read this directly as verbatim. When conflicts arise, corporations, governments, organized crime syndicates, and even wealthy individuals subcontract their dirty work to specialists, who then perform shadow runs or missions undertaken by deniable assets without identities, those that wish to remain unknown. And I thought that was a perfect way of putting it. Basically,
that's right from the Shadowrun wiki.
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, from Wikipedia.
Okay.
But one of the things about that is that you always go to the same named individual. It is a Johnson.
Yep. He's Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnson.
Why? Because he wishes to remain anonymous.
Yep.
And so he's just Mr.
So
Johnson.
it may be some dude in the back of a bar. On the other hand, it may be some dude in a club, or it may be some guy who pulls up in a hover Cadillac. Or it may be a dude...
just teleconference with him.
Yeah, or maybe it's a dude under a bridge. Like, they're all named Mr. Johnson.
Yep.
And you work for them to get your jobs.
Yep.
And your status means a lot. Not just if you lived or died, or if you finished the job, but your status. How well you did it.
Actually, for Shadowrun inspiration, one thing I would actually watch, obviously it's not Cyberpunk, but like Ocean's 11 is a great inspiration for Shadowrun, because you've got a group of individuals all have their own specific jobs to do this mission, and then and they all know their place in it, and they all kind of wish to just do the job, and then you walk away because this is it's a criminal enterprise and you're not getting involved. It tells those kind of stories very well.
I would agree. It is the fringe. It is the leverage.
Leverage. I was going to say leverage, yeah.
It is everything when it comes to fighting back as a team in some way, but having every single person doing it for a different reason.
Yep.
Yeah. Another good one is your other favorite, Burn Notice.
Burn Notice
is another good a point that gets close to that, because again, you were thrown out. You're trying to work your way back in. Maybe. Yeah.
But trying to uncover the layers of mystery there. But it's a job, and sometimes you got to get your hands dirty and stuff like that. And I think those are really great sources of inspiration, even without touching on the cyberpunk aspect of it. Obviously you go to Blade Runner for that. But
very much so.
Where else would you reach? For aesthetic, sort of inspiration.
I think that it depends on what direction you're going. There's a lot of corporate-based stories that fit, but I think Shadowrun mimics the dystopian nature of Blade Runner very cleanly. Like you can connect directly to those types of stories. But there's a lot of actual written stories that it follows a lot closer.
Was it Neuromancer? I believe
Neuromancer, is one of them.
Kind of kicked the cyberpunk genre off, or at least inspired a lot of what we know as modern cyberpunk.
Neuromancer, Snow Crash, Johnny Mnemonic is another good example.
Oh, Johnny Mnemonic was phenomenal.
If you know Johnny Mnemonic, you've pretty much seen a Blade Runner.
Yeah,
I mean, he effectively is a solo Shadowrunner.
Yeah,
he's effectively a Shadowrunner.
Yeah, he's a decker.
He's a solo, but pretty much everything in that movie is from Shadowrun or Cyberpunk in general.
Right down to the monofilament whip.
Yeah. The only thing again that's all missing is this fantasy element that gets thrown, the sixth world element. So one of the things that Shadowrun does differently than most Cyberpunk's game is it adds in this concept that goblinization occurred. So basically, magic resurges due to an event, and you have people basically start mutating into orcs and elves and trolls, which they were before. They just didn't know it, and so as it comes out, and even dragons,
not enough magic in the world for them to express that.
Correct, and now there is, and things like Atlantis and Tir na Nog and Tirtan Gyre and all these mythical places are there, are back again, and showing themselves in full skin.
Dragons flying out of Mount Fuji.
Some of them trying to become president.
A lot of the cultures that were more in tune with the flow, the ebb and flow of magic in the world, such as the Native Americans and such like that, started actually seeing a lot of their power come back, and because they were more in tune with it, they were more ready for it. And so you've got actually like a corporation called As Technology came back. There are like they carved whole nations out. So there was a great resurgence of Native American political and social power. Shamans are very much a thing now. Because the spirits are real. You can talk to them.
Yes.
And
interact with them. And bugs are a thing. There are some very, very giant, horrific bugs out there as well. So,
ghouls and yetis and
everything you can think of.
A lot of the skim the D&D monster manual, and it's probably somewhere in Shadowrun.
Yeah,
we can't guarantee it's social, but
it's also not a direct comparison. You're not gonna you'll find the creature, but it's not going to be what's listed there.
Right.
Like you could be a troll hanging out in Pulley Up.
Yeah, and trolls aren't going to be horrible monsters. Trolls are your next door neighbor. They're sentient,
But at the same time, you take them to Upton, and they unless you're the bouncer, you're not getting in the club because they don't like metas.
Yeah,
like racism is a huge thing.
Oh, it is.
And it's no longer you're from this country. It's you're literally a dwarf and Asian. You should die.
Yeah.
You should just kill yourself.
The pointy ears on your head. We don't feed weed eaters here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all things. And along with that came a whole bunch of terminology that they threw in the book, throughout the book, and then at the end basically gave you an index of terms.
Yeah. It had its own lexicon. Like they built their own slang for the future, and then just leaned into it. Calling your friends chummers.
Yes.
The words frag and dreck were your big go-to swear words.
Yep. You had Stuffer Shack, which was basically your 7-Eleven.
7-Elevens. Yep.
Yep. Simpacks, which you had dock wagons. These were all terms that they came up with as ways for you to feel connected to the genre. And I think all of this helped, and it did things that no other game system was doing at that time. It wrapped you in a world that you could then do something with. And it was a complete world, and as I said, it carried even through the additions. Nothing changed as far as the world. Like the world moved forward years to year, and it was funny, there was a time when you could actually look at the current date and know what edition you were in and what the year was in Shadowrun. Now that changed, and it screwed a lot of people up. But effectively,
it used to be 61 years in the future.
Correct. And you could move forward with that, and as they released things, it matched up. Now I think 6th edition, they said, is 2082 is where we're sitting right now in time. So not exact anymore. So
But yeah, it started off in when it was published in 1989. Started off in 2050.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep. So
and I was actually just saying to you guys last night, like it's funny to me that the ubiquitousness of tabletop role playing games has gone on so long, or ubiquity, I believe, of tabletop role playing games has gone on so long that we're actually starting to hit some of those mythical distant future dates.
it's true.
You know, like Shadowrun is not so far, like first edition Shadowrun at least, is not so far in the future anymore that we can't see it. You know, technically its storyline starts, I think, in 2012. Is when it actually diverges from our futures, when we get that magical influx back in. And like Aberrant, when we talked about that, was actually set in 2008. No, they've bumped it to 2028, I believe, in the new version of it from Onyx Path, but it's strange to go back to older versions of some of these futuristic games and see like, oh wow, that was 8 years ago in the distant future, you know.
Yeah, and it's funny that we had this. I mean, let's take it back for just a second here and kind of give a weird dystopian of this, but. Well, during the Cold War, we were pretty confident that we were just going to be gone.
Yeah.
That it was just a matter of years before we're gone, not decades. So, talking about a distant future where everything's been annihilated and we're starting over again, or semi-version of that, you know, corporations stepped up so that we weren't annihilated, basically, but it doesn't mean that we weren't well on the way there.
Right.
You know, Rifts kind of did that. BattleTech did that. I mean, Star Trek said it had happened. So the fact that we survived the Cold War is a huge step. I mean, if you went back in time to those people, they'd be like, "So how is it in 2020? Is everybody irradiated? Like, are you drinking water from, you know, you purified systems and your skin slowly sloughing off?" No, we're doing okay. I mean, it's okay in comparison, but at the same time, like, this was unbelievable to them. So writing dystopians that were 20 years in the future, 30 years in the future, you know, seemed pretty plausible. And now here we are. Like, also, we don't have flying cars, but, you know, we could by, 10 years from now, maybe. I mean, look at what's happened already. I mean, we could have a whole discussion about that, but let's digress back to the game here a little bit more. So, so that being said, what we're going to focus on today is basically 4th edition and beyond. There was a few differences between 4th to 6th edition, but effectively the mechanics we'll focus on are effectively starting there. So one of the things that the game is based upon is basic dice mechanics.
Yes.
It's the simplest is that if you've ever played White Wolf, keep that in your mind. You know, those types of games.
So you're rolling a pool of dice. You're trying to get a certain number or higher on those dice.
Correct.
And every individual die that rolls above that threshold is kept as a success.
That's correct.
And you're going to tally successes rather than an individual number to try to reach a threshold.
Exactly. Now, they do have ones. And ones do have a value, and if you get half of the dice that you roll, so whatever your pool size is, if half of those dice are ones, you have a glitch. Now, a glitch isn't like a critical mistake or anything like that, or it's not going to affect your success. I mean, if you did succeed, you still succeed.
But there might be an added complication. You
Correct.
may succeed with
something
consequences.
misfortunate happens. Sure. You know. Now, on the other hand, if you don't succeed, at all, like you make no hits, meaning you didn't succeed even in a single one, and you still had a glitch, it is a critical glitch, and at that point it's severe and could be fatal. Like, you know, maybe instead of shooting the guy, a round jams in your gun and backfires. So now there's a problem. You know, whereas, like, if you had successes, maybe you did, like, do a full rip of your gun, you know, empty it down to the last round, but, like, the second to last round jams. So now you've got a jammed round in your gun, and the clip won't come out.
Yeah, you still shot the guy, but, you know.
Versus it blows up in your face, you know. So, you then have, you know, dice pools are task-specific. So you've got mechanics for those as well. So you have a whole pool of dice that you're moving from thing to thing.
So some of you may have seen a meme about Shadowrun, probably the most common meme in existence about Shadowrun, and that is the gigantic bucket of D6.
Yep.
It's not that far off.
No, it really isn't. It really isn't. And then you have Karma Pool. Now, Shadowrun is also a game where you don't have experience, per se. You have karma, and karma is what moves you forward. It costs karma to change your skills.
So it's effectively experience points, but it's a point buy sort of. It's a currency.
Correct.
Okay?
Correct.
So rather than games like Dungeons and Dragons you might be used to, where you just accrue experience, and that experience, once it hits a certain threshold, you go up a level.
Right.
Okay. This is very much like actually more akin to White Wolf.
Very much so.
Where at the end of the session I might award you, say, 5 to 10. I don't know if that's a good number.
Just go with it.
But anyways, 5 to 10 experience points or whatever, or karma points. At which point those will be used as currency to then upgrade your character in a non-linear fashion.
Yeah.
So there's no levels in this system. There's no classes in this system. You just spend your points wherever it is you feel you need to improve your character.
Right. And your karma pool determines how much you have. So you actually have a pool of dice that you can use and refreshes. But at the same time, karma is also how you expend things. You can burn karma to do things. So there's some playability there. There's also a difference in the way that actions occur, not necessarily the initiative, but think about it more along the layer that there are layers of things. So in this game, you have your physical stuff. I'm shooting this guy, I'm punching this guy, we're doing this on the street. You then have the matrix and hacking. Now, 4th edition, 5th and 6th shifted things from it being a separate action set to kind of being a little bit more in line by giving, instead of being I deck in and I'm literally in a totally different interface, disconnected.
The Matrix actually used to be a lot more like the movie, The Matrix,
right?
In which you would be plugged in and essentially comatose with a jack in your head.
Yep.
While you were experiencing stuff in an alternate world and working through the computer systems from the inside there.
Yes. Now you've got an overlay, so you're actually seeing the Matrix occur in a augmented reality.
Yep.
Yes, that's perfect. And so you can hack and technically shoot, but there's some problems with doing that still.
Splitting your attention, essentially.
Right, you're literally splitting your dice.
But at least you can see what's going on in front of you instead of laying comatose in a van somewhere.
Likewise, if I'm doing something astrally or magically, I'm fighting something that is unseen to everybody there, possibly. I may be this weakling little, elf who sits in the corner and basically looks like like an imp. But in the astral world, I am a huge hunking badass who can punch out, pretty much anything. So it's a matter of perspective of each one of these layers of combat that layer on top of everything else. And if your players don't have it, then it's not that big of a deal to pull it away. And that's one of the things that makes this game really neat. Is that you do have that flexibility, which kind of lends into the character creation aspects of that.
See, character creation has always been my favorite aspect of Shadowrun. Because of how how the whole system works for it. It's a priority system, okay? So what you're given is basically different priorities of magical talent or wealth or just raw stat points,
right? Or
skill points. And I'm trying to think of what else is in there. That's 4 things, but anyways, there's a couple other things.
Resources.
Like
so you have your resources, which is money,
right?
You have your attributes,
skills, magical talent. Oh, metahuman status. Your race is actually something. So, anyways, you've got these 5 or 6 different categories, and you have to rank them essentially from highest to lowest priority. Meaning that if you want a boatload of just raw attribute points, you can have that, but that might mean that you have to give up magical talent. Or that might mean you have to play a human instead of a troll like you really wanted to.
Right. There's bonuses and benefits to it.
Or your character might be highly, good in attributes, highly skilled, but dirt poor.
Yeah.
So it's a very give and take sort of system with a lot of variation to it. And so not everybody's necessarily going to come out 100% equal, but you're all going to come out balanced. And I think that's great.
Yeah, it was a different way of doing character design and allowing you to say, okay, what is the priority that I want to take?
So Knox in the Box asks in the live chat, do I have to spend points to build each version of myself, real and Matrix me?
No.
Not really. Matrix U is a program.
It's a construct.
It's a program. So what you're really spending there is not stat points, but money on good programs.
Good gear.
Think of it like putting together a computer. And so you're going to want to spend money on good versions of, antivirus programs and good versions on hacking programs.
And your initial deck and the memory it has and the processor that it has.
Exactly.
And if it has add-on hardware or a secondary jack so that another decker could jack into it, or whatever. Like, literally every detail you think of from building a computer is effectively available in the game. And then that creates your avatar's strength and abilities within the world.
Those translate directly to your stats. And then, of course, a lot of it is based off of, like, your hacking skill. So essentially your prowess of how you implement those things in Matrix is basically just computer hacking.
Yeah.
So it's pretty clean, but there is some more like, virtual reality sort of aspects to it, and from a sci-fi sense of, attack programs called ICE, intrusion countermeasures, may actually look like physical monsters that are coming to attack you or something.
Correct. The constructs at a specific sorry, Jesus, my brain's Megacorp. Their initial security might look like samurais. And then behind that, it's like, its deep intrusion security might look like dragons, like black dragons.
Oni.
Yeah. And so, or ghostly versions of the other ones. And, everything's avatar has an image to it, but it doesn't necessarily make it any different than something else. It's a level of something. And the security levels are things that you're breaking down. And eventually, you can get access to things that aren't necessarily in the Matrix, like cameras and door security and fire suppression systems. And all of that. That's all part of it. So...
It's actually one of the reasons why I find Shadowrun very difficult to run and very difficult to wrap my head around, because there are so many layers of things.
Yeah, well, it's as layered as you want it to be.
Well, but that's the thing, is it just even from a world building standpoint. I mean, it would be one thing if we were playing a Cyberpunk game. Okay, I could definitely have an easy time wrapping my head around that. But this is a Cyberpunk game with a living, computer matrix, with a living internet that is a very real thing that interacts with the world, on top of all the magical stuff. And it's like you're almost playing 3 games at once sometimes. To me.
No, that's a great way of putting it.
And so because there's just so many things to juggle, personally, I find that a little difficult to deal with.
And but again, the same could be said for people who are dealing with like Palladium psionic systems.
Oh, yeah.
And crazies and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, hey, I hated that stuff, too. I want to be very clear.
Yeah. But you can always set limits to your story.
Yes.
And what you want your players to play. And so, from that, you have, like, they give you archetypes, but those aren't necessarily hard, fast rules. So, like, someone who is heavily augmented but uses weapons and uses cyberware and bioware and might have a lot of physical combat, they might be classified as a street samurai. Whereas if you choose to have your body very natural and keep your essence very high, and use your combat and use magic in a physical sense, like a monk or something, you might be considered an adept. You have deckers and hackers, which are kind of the same thing now.
Yeah.
Who use systems and software, but you also have the ability to control equipment as well, which was rigging, which was separated before, is now kind of come back together as all kinds of technology.
Because it's basically just utilities on a network.
Correct.
And whether that's a gun drone or a security camera, you're doing the same thing to it.
Yep.
We also now have technomancers that have been thrown into the mix, which are mages that manipulate technology through magic. So that's kind of neat. And then you've just got your straight up mages. Your mages also come like in shamans who deal with spirits and such like that and get their magic through pacts with the spirits. And you've got your straight up magicians who just are your good old fashioned D&D wizard style. They know calculus, so they can manipulate the forces of the world by reading a book.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
But it's cool because all of these things are very intrinsic parts of the world. It's almost like magic has kind of been demystified because it's been around for so long. So like, you go to you go to break into a corp headquarters or something like that, and like, I mean, think of it like Amazon. You go to break into an Amazon warehouse, and they have a mage on staff.
Yeah.
Who has 3, spy spirits lurking around in astral space, watching the place, as well as on foot guards.
Yep. Well, you have all your layers of security. Now there's a reason for that. Somebody could come in through magic. Somebody could come in through physical. Somebody could come in through the network. So you have to have all of these things to keep all of your stuff secure. Yeah. But it's a matter of how much do you invest where.
But it's neat to me that it's so mainstream that like the big corporations just have mages.
Yep, it's true. That's true.
Some guy who has a security card and a suit.
Yes.
Shows up every day and just pulls out his 5th level wizard spells.
It's true. It's true. All right. So in your opinion, what makes this unique? What makes it different than other systems?
Okay, so Shadowrun, to me, it's all about the story. It's all about the game world for me. You can say whatever you want about the rules. They are very layered, and so you can go as deep as you want, but you can also go as light as you want with it. But for me, the thing that does Shadowrun for me is all about this unique, rich, deep living world that they've created.
And it's just beyond the player. It stops at around the like 500 foot to 1,000 foot level. You never have any of those things directly interacting with the player. What interacts directly with the player are very generic things: the Johnson, gangs, financial issues, the general areas of the city. If you're even in Seattle or one of the major cities, so your interaction layer is still something that the GM has total control over. They just know that there's all these facets in the world that are very well defined for them to be able to play with. They know their motivations. But again, like knowing the motivations of Aztec Enterprises,
technology.
or technology.
Yeah.
A general idea of what they run, but like there could be a president of one of the divisions who's just doing his own damn thing.
Sure.
Who cares, But you know that they're there. You know what they are in that sense. There are lots of dice in this game.
Lots of dice.
One kind of die, but lots of it.
Oh my god, so many dice.
So much.
And I would say too that probably the biggest downfall of the game for me is the complexity of the rules. It's just simply because even at a base level, you kind of need to know what the deeper levels are so you can make your judgment calls on whether you want to use them or not.
Yes.
And so it gets a little dense sometimes.
I would agree with that. I would say that it always pays to have someone storytell it first for you, who is embedded, who knows.
Yeah.
This isn't necessarily a game that you can pick up the book, and maybe you can. Maybe this is something you can just pick up and read and go through. But for me, it is so much nicer to have someone who is so embedded in it that they can just roll through the rules like it's no big deal, and they enjoy every moment of that.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I also think it's neat that even for the length of this, and this is neat, there are still resources that were available at the beginning, basically the very opening of the internet. And even before, with some of the bulletin board systems, yes, I'm bringing up bulletin board systems for those people who are old enough for it. Those bulletin board systems were translated to initial early websites. Those websites, one was nearly lost. They actually recovered it, and it got stored on some of the, and it's available out there. But Dumb Shock was a site that was available before it was a site.
Yeah.
It was a bulletin board system. And like, I would be hard pressed for anyone to come back with a resource that is in a system that has lasted that long.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, they knew that this was going to happen, and like the community wrapped itself around it. And it's there, and they love it.
Yeah. Shadowrun players are some of the most fanatical players on the planet.
I would agree.
Absolutely.
Without being, I would say, as harsh or trolly.
Yeah, no, I've never, and that's the thing, is like, I've never known, like, the Shadowrun community to be really gatekeepy about things, necessarily. Like, I mean, you hear horror stories about D&D all the time, like, oh, you play D&D? Well, name 5 dragons, then, or something like that,
Right.
Like, but I don't think I've ever heard of, like, a jerk, Shadowrun gatekeeper. I'm sure it happens. But...
I've had a lot of weird fanboys who are just who might like know a little bit more about firearms and love showing that stuff off.
Yeah,
but like they're not nailing you for like screwing up that you don't know the number of rounds in a standard Ares,
exactly.
Predator.
They're just people who are maybe at 11 and need to be taken down to a 7 or something.
Or what the stats on a Smart Link, Smart Link 2 is on for an Ares when you're using it in combination with something else, like how the points layer out, and that's just the way it goes. But like they'll be there right to help you with that number, and pretty much tell you what page to go find it on. So, but no, I think it's a fantastic world, a fantastic system, and it makes you want to play it.
It does, and there's several video games too.
Yes,
that are out as well that are pretty highly regarded.
Yeah,
from what I understand.
I mean we won't talk about the Microsoft one, but
there's some bumps along the way. I mean, the most recent one, the Shadowrun Returns on Forward.
Yes.
There was a Hong Kong one. There was one called Dragonfall.
There was Boston Lockdown. Yeah, I've seen some of these that they kind of highly recommended. Yep.
They're not a 1-to-1 Shadowrun tabletop experience.
No.
But they'll at least give you the flavor of the storytelling, flavor of the world.
Very much so.
And give you at least a sampler platter of how the rules and system kind of work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
So definitely check out, type Shadowrun into your Steam search bar and see if you can find something on sale there.
Yeah.
They've been out for a while, so you should be able to find
Humble Bundle definitely has them, and their sales are good for that too.
Yeah, I think I picked up Shadowrun Returns like 3 years ago and never loaded it, but for like $5 or something.
Yeah, exactly. So,
you want to get some questions?
Yeah, totally.
All right.
Pick one.
Okay, so, Knox in the Box actually asked a great question.
Sure.
Kind of tangentially related to Shadowrun here.
Okay.
But I thought it was a really great question.
Sure.
As someone who knows nothing about Shadowrun, I tried to look into it a bit. I found it to be very rules/physics heavy for certain specific conditions or actions, to the point where some of them seemed redundant. Do you think the game would benefit creatively if the rules for certain conditions were more generalized so that new players could make decisions easier and more free of unexpected outcomes caused by not explaining their intentions specifically and correctly according to the game's definitions? As someone who can't always articulate exactly what they mean, I could see myself struggling with this game. I, for one, am a very big fan of standardization in games. When 6th edition Warhammer came out, they did a lot of that in their rule book where there was a bunch of disparate rules that all kind of did the same thing.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, this is now called random movement.
Yeah.
Period.
Yep.
So now, if you see this rule, it reads as, this unit has random movement 2d6.
Yep.
Period.
Yep.
And if you need to know what random movement does, it's right here in the book. You only have to look up one rule for it.
Yeah, I think BattleTech did that really well, too, in their most recent edition.
BattleTech did that really well. 5th edition D&D did a lot of that.
It did.
So, I'm able to sit there at the table and say, I am taking the dodge action as my action. And then my bonus action is going to be, a second wind. Where I'm going, exactly, they have names, they have rules, they have standardization across the board. And so there's no ambiguity of, well, I'm not going to move, but I'm just going to kind of like watch the guy to see, and then you have to try to figure out like, okay, maybe that's like disadvantage on attack rolls coming in or something. No, it's a dodge action. It has a name, it has a rule.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that sort of standardization helps all game systems, personally.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that Shadowrun is about detail and about pushing that level of detail where you can literally play it down to every piece of detail that you're describing. If I'm behind a wall, and I bring my machine gun up over the wall and I spray, but I've got a smart gun link, I've got smart rounds, I'm jacked up, I'm also on drugs, it's raining, the other guy's behind cover, but I've got a view of him because of a decker behind something. I can go to that level. I can get all of that information as a storyteller and put all that into a scene and have all that math come down.
Yep.
Or not. I can pull it way back and
Or
and play it at a lighter level.
I could, as the storyteller of this game, just say, let's see here. You've got some technology that's helping you. I'm going to call that +1. You've got someone who's spotting for you. I'm going to call that another +1 for a +2. But it's raining, so I'm going to call that -1. So roll it +1.
Yeah, and
you can do that, and then none of that's by the rules.
No,
you know,
but you definitely can do that, and the system is still well enough designed that if you follow your own table rules in that sense, that you peel back. Sure, why not?
Yeah,
I don't see an issue with that.
Heatsink says it sounds a lot like GURPS, and I agree.
Oh no,
it's layered rules like that. Yeah, absolutely.
It is as detailed and layered as GURPS ever can be, but done in such a precision that you don't have to go hunting for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can play Shadowrun with all of those detailed rules and have all that at your fingertips.
Yes,
which is nice. So yeah. I hope that helps answer the question.
The other thing that I think I said on the Discord when we were talking about it in the questions discussion channel is specifically to your point of having someone who can't always articulate what they mean when they ask to do an action, and then you get an undesirable outcome because you don't understand all the implications of things. For me, this is one of the big reasons why I've gotten into the habit of asking my players, what is your desired outcome here?
Right.
Okay, what is it specifically you see happening in your mind's eye when you do this if you were to succeed?
Mm-hmm.
And have them describe what that outcome is to you so you understand not only the story experience but their intentions, and you can kind of base your reaction to what they're trying to do off of that, and you can adjudicate the rule. Maybe it's maybe they need to make their stealth check with intelligence instead of dexterity or something like that.
Sure.
But you can at least understand what their intent is and help them get that gameplay experience out of it.
Right, exactly. Or, my direction on it is that if your players are like, hey, I'm a dexterity person and I'm going to try and trip this person.
Yeah, this came up in your game.
Yep. It's a matter of, is it physically possible? Is it something I can do? Sure. Let's roll some dice and see what happens. Sure. And then we'll talk from there. Mm-hmm. So, do a skill, move from there.
Yeah.
So, because I just find that easier to work with.
Sure.
So, you want to hit another one?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Matt Elf asks, well, not the first Cyberpunk game. No, it was not. Shadowrun seems to be the most popular in the genre, and I think the longest running. I agree. What do you attribute that to? I honestly say Cyberpunk, the game, came out in '88, and it was a dystopian future. Didn't have the magic, didn't have any of that stuff. It was much closer to that, but didn't have the following either. Their books really actually had a lot of errors in them, like just typos and weird things like that, and some missing charts and things. But the feeling of it was very dark and dystopian, and it just didn't have the same kind of wrap in the world that FOSSA had built.
Yeah.
And didn't have the follow-up stuff that went with it. Like, there were some side books that came with Cyberpunk, but they weren't as nearly as complete and story wrapping. Like, even the firearms book, the cybernetics book that came out as an addendum that just went into more detail there, continued the story.
Yeah.
And that really made a huge difference. So they kept wrapping story with everything. So you weren't just buying an addendum book on, a class. You were buying more story. You were buying a novel, if you will, to write into it. And so that kept pulling these people in, these people who wanted more information, and giving them more things to read and look at.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that really helped pull it along.
From the very beginning, just the visuals, the book had color pages in it. This was in a day in an age where oftentimes your source books were just black and white on regular paper. They weren't these glossy full color.
I mean, you had a cover, but that was it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you had full color plates in there, showing all this fantastic artwork, bringing the world really to life with you. You had all these nice little snippets of story interspersed throughout your book, and
done in unique ways.
And to me, I always felt like Shadowrun was a great example of that meme, where somebody gives an example and the boardroom execs are just all flat-faced, and then they say one more thing, and the boardroom execs go nuts in the last panel.
Yeah.
And it was always okay, cyberpunk dystopian future, flat faces.
Yeah.
With elves and dragons and magic. Yeah!
Exactly, yeah.
To me, that was what always made it for me. You compare that to Cyberpunk 2077 or 20 whatever it was at the time.
Yeah.
2077 is the video game that's coming out now. But you compare those two products together, and what's the difference? They're both cyberpunk dystopian futures, but one's got this extra something that makes it so cool and so unique.
Yeah. I mean, Deus Ex was a whole genre of video game that people followed religiously because it had story and cyberpunk wrapped into it. But even people said that it felt like it was lacking something.
Yeah. You know what was lacking? Wage mages.
Yep.
Yeah.
A reason. Like, oh, I'm a cop. Great. I'm an investigator. Great. You know.
With a scratchy voice.
Yeah. And now cyberpunk, I don't have to be that. Yeah. I can be anything. But at the same time, like, why am I? That's part of it, too.
Right.
So, all right. Overwatch has an interesting question here.
Okay.
Shadowrun has one of, if not the deepest and richest ongoing meta plots in tabletop gaming. I agree. As a storyteller, how does something like that affect building and running a campaign? Honestly, I think it makes it easier.
Oh, yeah.
It gives me a framework to then fill in all of the stuff they left blank.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to my earlier comment about how it's overwhelming sometimes.
I agree.
Because I mean, for me, there's a lot of different layers to have to pay attention to. You have to, even just a simple run of like your milk run style thing, where okay, we're going to go break into this facility, steal this thing from these corporate dudes, and give it to the Johnson. It's a very typical run.
Yeah, very very typical.
Okay, but just from a storytelling standpoint, I need to make the defenses here challenging but not overpowering so that you can do this job, but it will have its own challenges to it. I need to take into account magical stuff so that one of your mages doesn't just walk in and own the entire place. I need to take into account all of the matrix and virtual layers of security there as well. So that's a second layer on top of all that, as well as the physical security.
Exactly.
As well, and it's just sometimes it gets a little overwhelming, but at the same time, though, I'm glad all those layers are there because it's super cool, I don't know that I would ever really run Shadowrun effectively, but for someone like Overwatch who does have a brain that kind of works that way and can keep track of all those moving parts, like, man, sitting at the table with him when he was running Shadowrun for us at one time was, like, great.
It was wonderful.
And I'm going to call you right out on the air, and I'm going to say I want to do it again.
If you have someone who's dedicated to something, who really enjoys it as much as they enjoy doing it, you feel that.
Yeah.
And that energy comes out. And it makes me want to play in that world. It makes me want to build things in that world.
Shadowrun gives you so many cool building blocks with which, it's the bucket with all the cool Legos in it.
It really is. But it sets you in just enough framework to give you access to everything. To be able to say, I want to build a game where my players are living day to day in a struggle, have a reason to be together because they don't want to frag each other for the money because it's better off that they do it together. And then after that, the story can just go.
Yeah.
You're no longer trying to find the bonds. The bonds will be made. Their initial bonds are already there. So it's much easier. I mean, it answers the hardest questions that get asked in most games, which is, why are we getting together?
Yeah.
And the answer is, because the Johnson's effing hiring you.
Right.
And that's the person you have to work for.
And he might have hired you, but you decided you needed a rigger, so, hey, your buddy's playing one.
Yep, exactly. So that's my take.
All right, so next week's topic, we're going to be talking a little bit about alternatives to dice. We're going to be playing games with cards, with fudge dice, alternate styles of dice, tokens, Jenga towers, rock, paper, scissors.
Oh, man.
All that sort of stuff.
Right back to LARPing.
So it's not always about the dice, but it's always totally about the dice.
You can find us on Twitter at st_conclave, Instagram at st_conclave. You can listen to us, like you might be right now, on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. You can also find the link to our Discord and our Twitter, or you can go to our website at storyteller-conclave.blueberry.net, or the new link, which is just storytellerconclave.com.
Yep. I want to thank our Patreon members, as always. Knox in the Box, Sam, Arcane Asylum, and all the rest of you who contribute to us month after month. Thank you so much for keeping the show going. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems.
No, that was last time.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, we got some new ones. You're fine. Keep rolling.
I'm just reading the show sheet. I'm on autopilot.
That's fine.
Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find them at geefrogmusic.weebly.com. Our outro music you're hearing now is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find her at soundcloud.com/midairmachine.
We'd like to thank our families. Vicky, Sean, thank you so very much for supporting us through all this. All of our friends who listen to us and have dealt with all of our stories for all the years. Our D&D players, our 7th Sea players, our Shadowrun GMs, and you, our listeners.
Every single one of you. We love you.
We love you. Good night.